And good morning again. We're going first this morning to Fairbanks, Alaska to talk to Joe Miller, who may have defeated incumbent Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, a member of the Senate leadership, in the Republican primary up there. We have to stress may have beaten Senator Murkowski because they are still counting votes, and at last count he was running about 1,700 votes ahead. It may be 2 weeks before we know the final outcome there. But the fact, Joe Miller, that you ran the kind of race you did and that that it's coming down to the wire is fairly surprising, I would say, to a lot of people, even those in the Republican Party. But you seem to be, or could be, kind of the poster boy for these anti-establishment Republicans who are giving the Republican establishment such a run this year. I guess the first question we have to ask you, and I want to tell our viewers first, there is a delay in the sound reaching you, so there'll be some delay between my questions and your answers, but it's our audio. It's not because you're sitting there trying to think of an answer. It's just the audio. How did you do it, Joe Miller?
Well, you know, there are a number of factors. It involved, of course, obviously Governor Palin's endorsement, Governor Huckabee's endorsement, Lieutenant Governor Lehman, a number of radio personalities here in Alaska, including Dan Fagan, Glenn Beagle, and really at the base of it, our volunteer network. This is a very small state population-wise, and elections here are determined by the strength of your volunteer network. And we had volunteers that worked day and night. They covered every quadrant of the state. It was just an extraordinary effort.
There is a lot of federal money that pours into Alaska. In fact, I think Alaska ranks about second per capita of the amount of federal dollars that come into the state. As you say, a small state, 700,000 population. You've said that we can't afford all that federal money that's pouring into Alaska. Should Alaska get less money from the federal government?
You know, the government is going bankrupt. I don't think anybody can deny it's sitting at $13.3 trillion in absolute debt. By some estimates, $130 trillion in future unfunded obligations, that we are in any way in a good financial state. And that means that everybody in this nation is going to have to do some belt tightening. I think that's just common sense. But I think the answer to this is to basically transfer the responsibilities and power of government back to the states and the people. That is really the only answer, I think, out of this crisis. And for Alaska, that means our resource base. And certainly this state, with its resources, could be incredibly independent, incredibly economically powerful. But that really is the answer to the crisis that we're in right now.
Well, I mean, are you going to the voters now as November beckons here and say, folks, I got to tell you, I'm going to go back to Washington and tell them to send us less federal money? Is that your campaign promise?
What we're telling Washington, D.C. is that we're in transition. What that means is as we continue to tighten our belts, because fiscally that's critical for the economic solvency of this nation, we also transfer to the states more power, and that means more ownership of lands. It's not a situation where you just yank the financial plug, but at the same time you're transferring over discretion over the use of the resource base. In this state, 2/3 of it is owned by the federal government. There really isn't good constitutional basis for that. It's our position that as the money is restricted, the lands are transferred. And so that's the plan that we want to implement.
Now, you said no to stimulus money, that Alaska should create its own jobs. How would you go about doing that?
The resource base is extraordinary in this state. We have a hydrocarbon resource base, a mineral base, which is extraordinary, beyond that of any other state. The resources in this state, if only a fraction of them were tapped, would create more than enough jobs for the residents of this state and could be the economic engine, frankly, of the United States. We are an incredible state with incredible, incredible resources.
You have also taken some fairly controversial, some would say very extreme positions. First, you say you want to phase out Medicare. You want to privatize Social Security. I have to say there are a lot of people in Alaska who are on Medicare and are getting Social Security. Isn't that position going to be a problem for you in the election, in this general election?
Well, Yeah, and I would suggest to you that if one thinks that the Constitution is extreme, then you'd also think that the founders are extreme. We just simply want to get back to basics, restore essentially the constitutional foundation of the country. And that means the federal government becoming less onerous, less involved in every basically item of our lives. And what that means is there does have to be some transition. With respect to Social Security, what we've said consistently throughout this race is that if you've paid into the system, if you're dependent on the system, we have got to get the fiscal house in order at the national level so that we can continue to pay those benefits. But to suggest that there is nothing that can be done, that we have to continue as the way things are, ignores the fact that the trust fund is empty. It's full of IOUs. It ignores the fact that as of April of this year, there are more expenditures or there are more outlays coming out from Social Security than inlays. And it would be incredibly irresponsible for us to sit back and say that this is something that shouldn't be addressed. There are a lot of different options out there. We have to look at all the options that are out there, including privatization. It's something certainly that Bush championed in his first administration, something that Representative Ryan is looking at. I believe that it is irresponsible. It is basically part of the crisis of leadership in D.C. to not look at Social Security and understand that there has got to be a solution posed. We've got to take a look at it and make sure that we create a solution so our seniors aren't left out in the cold.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us this morning. I hope we can visit with you again as we get closer to November. Joe Miller, who may turn out to be the Republican nominee for the Senate, ending a 30-year period when either Lisa Murkowski or her father represented that state in the United States Senate.